the founding, he was one of the founding members of Heathen Women United when we first came together all those years ago. But in recent years, you've been a bit quiet, haven't you? See, because you've been doing your master's and your PhD and various other things, and her podcasts. I do recommend her podcasts, Mythic Deviant. Just some really interesting podcasts, and Steve's website as well, which is Mythic Deviant. So Steve is from Seattle, as you can see. She's a storyteller, and she tells stories both audio, visual, interactive, all kinds of, and in text, obviously, all kinds of storytellers. And she's got a PhD in mythology, comparative religion, and depth psychology. And I'm just reading this bit because I always get it wrong. Focusing on the potential to engage systems of oppression through storytelling, specifically concentrating on Norse mythology and gender, which is something that she's currently putting into a book form, aren't you? So we're going to have a book of all the interesting work and research that she's been doing, which is fantastic. And really, that's it. I will hand over, as we said before, she's going to be talking about the Norns and the working with the magic within the Voluspa and weaving wyrd. I think you'll explain everything yourself there, won't you, see? So I think that's all. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And I am just going to move directly into sharing the screen, in part so that I become small on yours. So this is my ritual attire, my ritual garb. It is green screen color. So I can't actually use the green screen I'm standing in front of because it would go really weird for you. So I apologize for the brilliant green, but here we go. Okay. So I'm in the psychology department and I can't see you. So if something weird happens, please say it because I can hear you. I'm in psychology, and so this is from a psychological take, and I am talking today about weaving wyrd. So first, the Nornir, as we can see here, and you're probably all familiar with, what they're doing is weaving songs into stories and those stories into lives, or you could take a different way, stories into songs and those songs into lives. They're intertwining our intention and the way that we think about our lives, which is our story, with our voice and the sound and into our actual physical world. And there are, of course, 3 of them, and we'll go into each of them in great depth. But first, I'm going to start with, it's important that there are 3 of them. Originally, there were not. So back in the day, at the beginning of our recorded history of the myths, there were actually many, many, many Nornir, and there probably still are today, that are just walking among us. There are human Norns, there are divine Norns, there are all sorts of Norns. However, over time, we started sort of breaking them down. Also, originally the Norns and the Valkyrie were pretty much the same people. In fact, Skuld is mentioned specifically in both groups. And the original definitions are so similar that we couldn't really say that they were 2 different definitions. For whatever reason, over time, we began to story them apart or understand them as separate entities. But originally, they were the same people. And I might question that today. So there were many types. There were those 2 particularly. And they originally carved. They did not originally spin and weave and cut. They were originally carvers. And they would actually carve the words. However, when we met up, people are traveling around. And so when the Greek Morai hit the Norns, they broke them down into the 3 special Norns that we think of today, Earth, Verdandi, and Skuld. And it's always 3. Whenever we have divine power throughout mythologies, I don't want to say always because I don't know absolutely all of them, but by and large, there are 3. And the reason there are 3 is because we are human beings. And everything we do, we take in through these human bodies, and these human bodies think in terms of 3. And I will move on. So we very much as people have a 3-part mind. To the best of our knowledge, we are the only creatures in the world who are carrying around our remembrances of our past, as well as sort of envisioning our futures, even as we experience the moment. And this gives us great power in terms of we get to really be the imagination of the world. So for a moment of sort of transparency, the way that I think of the world is I feel like we are each a cell in the body of the divine. We are all interacting, and I don't mean just human beings, I mean all creation is interacting all the time. We are each doing our own little parts. And as human beings, our part, in my mind, is largely to do this imagining and to take these visions and to concretize them. I think we're the frontal lobe or the imagination center of Gaia. Could be wrong, you're welcome to argue, but that's sort of my personal viewpoint. So as we move forward, we're working in these three parts at all times. This makes us powerful in that we can imagine. It also makes us diffuse in that our power is not usually all in one place, right? We're keeping a little bit of power in the past and we're keeping a little bit of power in the future. And then of course we have some power in the moment, generally speaking. And so part of what the Norns do is coalesce that power into a single story in this single moment, which gives us sort of more momentum moving forward, more power to put into that song. It also affects everything we do. Everything we do, absolutely everything, is sort of put as part of that three-part mind, that past, present, and future. Part of being a human being is living in this body and having this understanding and embodying this particular structure in our world. And as human beings, we have very victoriously made it to the top of the food chain because we have a single human superpower. Well, we probably have more than one. The one human superpower we have, I know we have more than one, is that we work together. Cooperation is our biggest single superpower. It is the thing that brought us to the top of the food chain. It is the thing that allows us to move forward in such a way that we can overcome obstacles. And it is very natural to us. So even a newborn baby, when we study newborn babies, we find the thing they want to do more than anything else is affect change in their world. What they want to do is have influence. They want to work and they want to contribute and they want to be part of their own worlds. Human beings at our core thrive on contribution. So no one, that we also found psychologically when we studied people that that's one of the core things to happiness. People are only happy when they are contributing to the group, when they are doing work and bringing things forward for the group. The opposite of that is ostracism. When we feel excluded or when we feel left out, we really hurt. Because our superpower is cooperation, because a superpower is cooperation, we really need that cooperation. And we know on a cellular level that if we are not in a place where we are cooperating, where we are contributing, where we can thrive, then we will die. And that's not a joke. We will die. Like whether it's because we're isolated in a mountain and we starve to death, or because the people around us turn on us, we cannot live alone. Like there are a few examples, you know, there's a Buddhist monk who's been in this cave for 20 years, but somebody's been bringing him food, right? We just cannot survive alone. And our bodies know this. So we experience deep physical pain as well as psychological pain when we're ostracized from a group. And this impedes our nervous system, it impedes our cognition and our functioning, and eventually it's fatal. So we freak out when we think that we're not part of the group, when we think that we're not contributing at a really deep level. There's no, oh, get over it. Can't be gotten over. It's just part of who we are as human beings, part of our functioning. And for that reason, we bring that into our past, present, and future. So when we move forward, we're always attending with everything we do, with everything we think, to our identity, which is essentially our own views of how we fit in the past. What is our story about our past? Our reputation, which is our story about our future, what we intend to be doing in the future, what we need to set up so that we can do it well in the future, and our lives, what we're doing in this moment. So we're always juggling the three of them, and we're always trying to attend to them to make sure that we fit into the group in every way. And that three parts, that identity, who we used to be, and our reputation, who we intend to be in the future, as well as our moment of choices, who we are in the moment and how we're going to get there, is reflective. So we set up all of these situations, all of these structures in our world that are reflective in this three-part manner. Everything we do has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we tell a story, we move from the normal world to the adventure world to the normal world again, we return. When we do a presentation, we do an introduction, we do a body, and we do a conclusion. We are always saying what we're about to say, saying it and saying what we said. And those two, the past and the future, as we think of them today, are reflective. Whatever we were going to say probably is what we said, one would hope. So we keep the same content in the past and the future in our own stories, right? As we move forward, we think whatever happened in the past, that's going to be what's happening in the future. There is a link. And there's confirmation bias. So all the research has shown how much we want to be right. And this is partly because we really want to be viewed as a good part of the group. We want to be viewed as having worth, having value, as contributing. So we want to be right so that we're really contributing. We do not want to be the person who's out there saying all the wrong things. So we will find any evidence to prove to ourselves that we are right, because our bodies are brilliant and we understand very little of what we encounter. I want to say it's 40, I think it's 30.38% of what we encounter we can see, even just visually. I have the actual statistic on the left side, I'll get it. But we can see very, very little of the visual information around us. We can conceive far less than that of the full information we have around us, right? And even that is based on what we can measure, right? So we can only compare what we perceive to what we can measure. So there are, in my opinion, probably many things out there that we don't understand enough to measure. And so we're really in the dark in a very big way. And so we want to make sure that we are right, even in that dark. So we create these stories to give us meaning, to move us forward, to allow us to be accepted as part of a group. And we try to make ourselves right. So when we encounter something that agrees with what we already believe, we immediately think that's accurate. But when we encounter something that disagrees with what we already believe, we immediately dismiss that to the best of our ability. If we cannot dismiss it, or if we have a belief that the person who said it was really smart and wise and probably knows what they're talking about, the best we can do is file it away, because it does not fit into our story. It doesn't fit into our narrative of the past and our expectation for the future. So we have no way of incorporating it into our present. It doesn't fit within our mind and our viewpoint. Stories are different. So stories are the things that actually make it past that, because they can completely bypass our confirmation bias. A story comes with its own past and its own future, so it doesn't have to fit into ours. We just accept the entire thing. We just completely assimilate it without thought, which is why people can sell really foolish ideas because they wrap them in a right story. So people just take it in without actually questioning it. So this can be really dangerous. It can also be really beneficial, depending on whether that story one is assimilating or accepting is in one's favor. And the other way is a lived story. So rituals are lived stories, and a ritual both acknowledges us, the person engaging in the ritual, as part of the group, and it validates the group. So it has a double positive for us. However, when we engage in these rituals without really understanding what the ritual is saying or meaning, we can completely undermine ourselves by stepping through things or into things that we don't necessarily want in our own lives because it seemed like the thing to do at the time and we don't question them. So one of the things that the norns are doing, if not the main thing the norns are doing, is remything. They're helping us as human beings, probably doing other things with other creatures, but as human beings, they're helping us to create myths within ourselves that really work for us. They're helping us take our stories and tell them in such a way that empowers us. And they're teaching us how to put those stories into the world. So there is a long history of many, many different cultures and modalities of speaking the world into being. And this is another one. The Norns are speaking the world into being. They are, and they do this, of course, through to the two types of fates. So we have Orlog, and then we'll have Wyrd. So Orlog, I'm using as the mandatory. I saw one thing where these are reversed, so there's that. Orlog is very mandatory, and so the Norns, of course, show up at the birth of a child, and they speak or sing their Orlog into being and give them their purposes. Orlog is very much our birthright and is pretty much written onto our DNA. It includes all of our ancestral obligations. So the Orlog is our mandatory stops on our journey. And its complement is Wyrd, which is not a mandatory stop, but sort of a stop that we kind of need to take either way. So this is a map of Seattle to New York, me to my birth family. So you can see that there are 3 different ways that I could take where I could cross the country. And so Wyrd is very much like that. The Orlog would be where I am now and where I want to go. Those 2 are sort of solidified in stone. However, the way that I make my way through them could be very different, but not too different, right? There are only 3 ways. There aren't 50 million ways without stopping for lots of things. That's a whole different thing. And so our Wyrd guides us, but is far more malleable. Our choices distinctly impact our Wyrd as opposed to our Orlog, but we can still impact our Orlog. Okay, so back to the 3 Norns. So here we've got Earth, and put a book on here because the Old Norse word book does mean book. It also means tapestry. So it's also the thing that we are weaving in terms of the Norns. We are weaving our own life. We are weaving our own story. We are creating our own book. And it's a book that very much binds us to the earth and to the past. And then there's Verdandi and Verdandi. So back to Erd a moment. Erd is Orlog, right? The past is written. So we're probably not going to do a lot of rewriting for that. I'm actually going to talk about what we can do with that. But the past is done. It's not something we're working on now. It is written in Orlog, including our ancestral past as well as our own past. Verdandi, however, is this moment and contains our current present choices, and her name means becoming. And Verdandi is very much dealing with Wyrd. So she is not Orlog. She is actually dictating how we're going to move from point of Orlog to point of Orlog, how we're going to navigate our own lives. And then Skuld, and Skuld's name actually refers to unresolved debts. So the Norse had a very different idea of memory and future than we do. And for the Old Norse, the future didn't exist as we think of it. The future was an open question rather than having some kind of trajectory. And that's because of this Orlog and Wyrd. So in Old Norse thought, the past is a story. It is a memory. It did happen. And it happened differently for everyone. So there are points of Orlog where we can say, this is what happened, or this is what happened, or this is what happened. But we only remember points. And then we fill it in with our own stories. And this is both contemporary science and in Old Norse thought. So particularly, I want to say it's with Sigrid. When they get together after they haven't seen each other for a long time, they actually review their memories. What about the past can we agree on before we move forward? So there's always this idea that the past has happened, it is written, and it is important. However, it's also tainted by my own thoughts and memories moving forward. And so it's a personal past, as well as having points of a joined past. So there's the memory, but one also remembers in Old Norse thought, the future. So the future is not envisioned as we think of envisioning, which contains more of an idea of creation and imagining than in Old Norse thought. In Old Norse thought, the future is what we owe. So given that these things have happened in the past, and that I'm making these choices now, that means that I now have an obligation to the world of this. And so the future is not a stagnant thing out there that is guaranteed. It's not guaranteed at all. And in fact, if I don't resolve these things, I simply pass them to my children, right? So my ancestors have given me all these obligations, all these different issues that they dealt with. Whatever they didn't finish, I got. And so whatever I have, I can choose to finish them. I can choose not to finish them. I can choose to leave them unresolved, or I can choose to make them much, much worse, which is usually what happens if we choose to make them unresolved. But in any event, they must be resolved. They will be resolved. Skuld will make sure that at some point that thread is wrapped up, that thread is tied off. We can't just let it dangle. So she's actually Orlog again. There's not a choice there, right? We will be doing that thing. We will be engaging in that unresolved topic. It's not a choice. So she's back to Orlog. So at all times, we're very much standing in our wyrd, directing our wyrd, but we also have Orlog on either side that we need to be attending to. And back to our ancestors. So again, our DNA is really our most studied ancestral pattern. It is structured. And we are really inheriting from the past. We're increasingly seeing scientifically, through all the research, that we are inheriting and passing down trauma all the time. And not only do we just pass down trauma sort of globally, like it's not like, oh, here's a new baby, it gets all the trauma. As that child grows, maybe the child hits 5 years old. Maybe if I had a horrible trauma when I was 5 and my child hits 5 years old, that child will experience the repercussions of that trauma, even though it was mine, if I have not dealt with it, if I have not resolved it, if I haven't sewn that up so that Skuld can cut it off, then I'm going to pass it down. So we are constantly, sort of in that flow of trauma until we choose to pick up those threads and tie them off, until we choose to end whatever it is that we are dealing with in our ancestral lives or in our personal lives, so that we don't have to hand them to our kids. And back to, it's also really bound to the earth. Yeah, it's bound to the earth. So again, that being part of it all is very important, because that's where we get our empowerment. That's where we get our power, particularly as humans. Like, we are attached to everything. We are very connected. We are into cooperation. We are empowered by that attachment to the earth. But it also has genetic, so doing this work, doing the work of the Norns, or doing Scythe, or working with Orlog and Wyrd, is actually genetically linked. That does not mean that it's 100% genetically linked, not at all. It's actually linked in my mind. So there's been research on what equates to, across culture and time, a witch. And what actually the definition of a witch is, if you remove the time and culture, is somebody with Asperger's with an oxytocin receptor gene set to G, which means it's somebody who pretty much has Asperger's and is especially compassionate. And those are both genetically linked. Not entirely genetic, but genetically linked. And the biggest, perhaps, repercussion of those linkages, of that condition, is something called synesthesia. And synesthesia is when we mash up our senses. So the way that it's biggest or weirdest for me, that people commented on when I was younger, was that for me, every number has a color. So, but it's any sense. So if you can smell a color or taste a shape, anytime that we have senses that essentially blur together rather than being distinct, we're sort of encountering the world in a different way than the majority of people. And that is what allows somebody to do this kind of work, because one of the biggest things in it is a synesthesia with time. So I love that you're talking about sound and time, because that's very much it. It's the blurring of time is an enormous gift in doing this kind of spiritual work and in doing the weaving of wyrd, because we are able to sort of link into that ability to change the entire tapestry, not just to change this moment, where if my experience of time was distinct from my other experiences, if I wholly bought into linear time, which I absolutely do not, time would be separate. It would not be something that was malleable. But because of synesthesia, people with synesthesia have the ability to sort of work with time in a much more fluid way, to essentially mold time or speak to time or interact with time. And according to the Norns, to storytell into time through song or chant or speech. Okay. And this does also, it does go both ways. So we both have a greater ability to speak and a greater ability to listen. So why is it all linked up with the textiles? So with the textiles, the idea of spinning, first, it really works well in terms of in storying things. So because the human mind works through stories, we want to be able to express ourselves through stories. We use stories to convey things that are beyond conveying to one another. And so spinning is a fantastic way, when everybody spins, of getting across the idea of working in a way that creates something, and a something that is a little bit out of your control. So spinning is not wholly out of your control. You can certainly get fantastically good at it, but there is a way that the wool pulls itself, or whatever fiber you're dealing with. The actual fabric creates itself, and all you're doing is guiding it. And so there's that aspect of guiding creation into the world, which is very much what wyrd is doing as she spins into creation. There's also the idea that we create different types of fabric, different types of things. So for example, colors, so could be fabrics, could be, you know, the different fibers, but whatever. We have different things that we are pulling in, and we get what we're given. Like somebody hands us wool when we're born, we get wool. And we could do different colors of wool or different ways that that wool is expressed. I feel like I'm getting really abstract here, so I'm going to do a metaphor. So for example, if what I have is willpower, I'll say willpower is my wool I was given at birth. And I might dye that wool, some of that wool blue and some of that wool red. So maybe my blue wool becomes my willpower that is used to ensure that my home is stable and kind. But maybe my red wool is my willpower as it is used to fight with the neighbors. Not so great. But I have both sort of the warrior and the pacifist wool, or will in this case. So I have a variety of things that can come into my life that I create, but also were given to me. It's a co-creation between myself and the world that both is and is not within my control, right? I'm using what I have, I'm using what is happening, and I'm guiding it to bring it to the place that I would like. So that's earth. Then we have the weaving. So then we will weave our actual lives. So again, with the wyrd, we're making choices that actually dictate what those things we were given will be. So we're making a choice to heal that family pattern, for example, or to continue that family pattern, or to start a new family pattern, or even to just take something on ourselves personally that may or may not become a pattern. And that's less common than we would like to believe, I think, generally speaking. Generally speaking, we are really very intertwined with one another. We, particularly that now we live in cultures where we're told that it's all about the individual, that the single person can do things. And the single person certainly can do things, and that's wonderful. And especially the power to heal is fantastic. One person healing really heals many, many, many people. It's amazing. And simultaneously, we are operating in concert. We are attached to one another. We do need to fit with one another. And so we are always taking in from information as well as putting it out. We are always in connection, both with each other as human beings and with the world as a whole. We're constantly in that. And the more that we're in it, the easier the world is. The easier the world is, and the more beautiful our tapestries can become. And we have the decisions to make about how we're going to actually move them forward, which is weird. And then sculpt, which is the cutting, is about cutting away our tapestries. And that can be the tapestries when they're complete, when it's a shroud, my life is done. It can also be the cutting away of a tapestry when that issue is complete. Say something has gone on for many generations, but I have managed to tie it off. I can cut it off my loom, and that can be done for me. I can move along, which is a great thing. And it affects our descendants again. Plus, we each hold a string. So you can see if we're each a string in the greater tapestries of our community, the way that we interact actually causes different energies between the two. And how does this have to do with poetry, with form, with the actual singing or stating? So in the Voluspa, I'm using the Voluspa as the primary set here. The first stanza, so the first, I said 17, but that's not right. The first 27 stanzas are actually in this form, Fjornis blog. I will say these names entirely wrong. I apologize in advance. I do not speak that language. I only speak English, which I feel bad about too. So in this poetic form, which is actually referred to as the ancient form or the form of ancient verse, in the Voluspa, the vulva uses this form entirely to concretize the past. So she's very much working with this story archetype. Like she is working with the idea of past, present, and future. She is working with the idea of concretizing the past in Orlog, speaking the present into wyrd, and then essentially singing the future into Orlog again. So totally what she's doing. And I can give you a long paper on that. But she moves through the entire history in such a way that she is creating it as she speaks. So her first 27, Fjornis log, it's the ancient tale form, poetic form, and it allows her to say, this has happened and it is true. These are the places where we're going to actually hammer in. We're going to nail in these points in the Orlog for the purposes of creating this story or this intent moving forward. And this, yeah, so this form is 8 lines. We can go into the forms later if you want. And then we move into the 28th through the 30th verses. In these 3 verses, she's using something I'm going to probably mistakenly say as you're the hotter. And this form is very much about coalescing power. These 3 verses are essentially, I am taking control. Like, this is mine now. This is my story. And she's bringing that diffused power from the past and the present, or past and the future, and she's pulling it into the present so that she can use it. She's claiming it as her own in order to move it forward into the future. And this is considered a magical verse form. So this is a magical verse form of wyrd, as opposed to a magical verse form of Orlog. And then she moves it into the future. So then the 31st through either the 63rd or the 66th verse, depending on what you're reading, is in galdr, which is essentially the magic form of placing Orlog into the future moving forward. So she's saying, given that this is what has happened, I'm choosing this is what has happened, and I'm claiming this is my story and I have the power and the right to change it, then I am saying that the story now needs to be healed this way. So again, it's very linear. It has to be linear. She has to move from the facts of the past to the present moment to the future. In the case of the Voluspa, she brings everyone up. So she starts at nothing. She starts at Kanungagap. She brings in the giants. She brings in the gods. She brings everybody into the stage. She claims all of the power, and then she starts writing them all out. So it's again reflective, and she's writing out the same people that she brought in to begin with, right? So she's very clearly and cleanly created a structure that goes linearly from the past to the present and into the future. So she is remything, she is rewriting what has happened within that story. And she's bringing us forward. So to me, what is required in order to do this particular kind of work, and is to actually have the courage to decree ourselves the one who is going to heal this, who is going to work with what is, and who is going to bring an end to the disrepair, who is going to essentially pick up the threads that are still hanging out there and tie them off so that they can be cut away, so that we can create something much more beautiful moving forward. Even if what we have is tremendously beautiful, there is always room for more beauty. So it all comes down to having the courage to essentially live out a new story that will set our lineages free as we sing into being the creation of a new world, or as we embody the magic of our own. And that's all I got. And my thought was we could discuss it if we would like to discuss it, or we could actually try to do some. And I can't find where to actually turn off your thing.
You would just unshare your screen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I can't find is the unshare button. Okay.
I was going to say I just could do it for you, but you've done it for yourself now. Okay, well, should we start by seeing if anybody's got any questions or comments first, and then if you want to, we can do some practice. We can have a go. So, has anybody got any comments or questions to start off with?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I have already been doing trauma healing for my family and my ancestors, which it turns out to be very interesting. But because I know this history of my family and the amount of traumas that they've been through, it's gone from one generation to another generation to another generation. And I decided, that's it, it stops here. So now I have worked on a spell, and I have done some work with that, and it's not going to happen anymore. And I'm making sure that my future generation, my sons and my daughters, don't have to go through this, and their next generation will not have to go through the amount of trauma that my ancestors and myself have had to go through. So I think that's quite commendable, personally, myself. But I decided there and then, that was it. Stop.
Thursday, is there a question that you have to ask, or you just wanted to say the work that you were doing?
I just wanted to say the work, it's very similar to what she's talking about with the norms. And I just wanted to say that. I thought, yeah, I understand completely because I've already done it.
That's great. That's really good.
Thank you.
Do you want to respond at all, C? Or
I just want to say thank you. Thank you. That's to me, that's amazingly important work, and I'm so grateful that you're doing it. And it affects not only you, but first you, and then your family, and then your community, and then the human population, and then the globe. Like, we all benefit from everything everyone does to heal, and I'm deeply grateful.
I think we could all in lots of ways benefit from doing trauma healing in our past, even if it's not affected us as much as it affects others. Even if we're not aware of it, there are traumas to work on, I think, and working with the knowns and bringing that into the present and future is really an interesting process. Has anybody else got any questions or comments? Please just hands up or speak or say something, do something. No, not got any. Okay, then it looks like we're going to be doing, if you can facilitate this, see, do a bit of practice.
Well, yeah, honestly, my thought was to just actually think about it. So I would love it if you would like to. If you would think about what it is that your personal myth is, where it is that you are grounding yourself in your own orlog. Because one of the things about doing that, when we pick our orlog, we do very much like it's there. There are facts there, and we can interpret those facts in different ways that allow us to have different stories. And so I would argue that a huge thing in galdr is embodying the story, which puts out the intent. What is our intent? And that's both our intent with what we want to offer the world and our intent in what we would like to get from the world. Like what is our intent in it? So we can spin our own stories. I didn't mean that as spinning wool, but it kind of is. We can spin our own stories of the past in different ways. For example, and I hope this is not true of anyone, if my mother died when I was a small child, I could take that opportunity to tell myself that the world is unreliable and everyone I love will always abandon me and I am alone and lost. I could also take the opportunity to look at that same story and tell myself that my mother was a very kind and loving person and I was everything to her, and what she wanted was for me to have the courage and the strength to embody love. And I could decide that it was my soul's mission to bring love to everyone I encountered because she had died to give me the gift of moving love forward in the world. And now I have a very different life. Right now, I'm not sad and lost and alone. Now I'm very loved and loving, and I'm bringing love to the rest of the world. Like, it's how we tell the story of the orlog that allows us to create the trajectory into the future. So I'd like to first look at what the actual story is. And so it probably is, and maybe not, but very likely is, what would you tell somebody when you were getting to know them, but you wanted them to know the real you? You know, when you've known somebody for a period of time and you're starting to open up, but then you're going to tell them this thing. And this thing is going to let them know who you really are. What is that story?
Do you want us just to think about it or write it down, or?
Well, whatever you would feel good about. I would just think about it. I'm comfortable with silence. I get that many people aren't, so I'm sorry if I'm being too silent.
No, that's fine. I'm sure we are comfortable with silence.
Yeah. So, well, why don't we say write it down? If you feel like writing it down, you can write it down, but really it's about holding it in your heart, whatever that will take for you. Okay, and then when you have that story, like what about that story is set in stone? What about that story do you need to shift? You know what I mean? If you have that story, what are the facts of the story versus your interpretation of the story?
I have a question. How do you know the facts? How do you know if it's actually the facts?
Yeah, that is a great question. Like, yeah, yes, you don't always know the facts. Sometimes the facts can be, here is a repercussion. So for example, if I'm dealing with something that is from several generations back and I don't know those people and I don't know their story, I only know that I can look at my family and I can see that my family has had this issue for 3 generations. So something probably happened there. Then the fact of that story would be it has had this consequence that has led me to believe that this is an issue. So I would say I'm oversharing here, I'm sorry, but I would say that for my family, One thing that I have no idea where it started, but it really needs to be healed, is the desire to heal the external world over caring for the family itself. So somebody back there made a decision that their community was more important than their family, and that has had repercussions. And so I would say that that is the fact of that, is somebody did that and it caught on.
Karina, you had a question as well.
Yeah, I was wondering with this story, because, you know, we all have kind of an idealized version of how we'd like to see ourselves. But there's also good, bad, and ugly in that. And I'm kind of wondering, the story that we create, do we include do we include the things that we're not as proud of or as happy about when we're kind of creating that story of who we are and where we're coming from?
Honestly,
If that
I
makes
would.
sense.
It totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. I would, but I would also ask you to question what you are proud or not proud about. And so back to my will example, my will really has been fantastic in my life. My will has been amazing and incredible. I'm so grateful for my will. My will has also been the cause of all my problems, because I can be a real asshole. Like I can be really overpowering and mean and not even know it, like be completely oblivious to it. And so there, you know, in whatever you think is like your shadow, I'm sure it does have shadow aspects. Everything has shadow aspects. But I would encourage you to find the way that it's a benefit too. And think about it as the question of, how do I use this trait for benefit, for good, instead of against myself where it will hurt. Yeah.
What if you're able to see into the past and actually see traumas and things that have went on? Because mine actually goes through a female line.
That's great. Great, use it. Yeah, I mean, so my personal belief system is that, my belief is that we're all, each a soul in the body of God, and we can't really 100% say this is exactly what happened, but that doesn't matter, because, you know, we are part of this universe, this multiverse. We're part of this, whatever we're part of. And we're given the cognition to understand that we need to make the right steps forward, if that makes sense. Like, we don't get everything that's going on, but we get enough of a story so that we can function, so that we can do the healing we need to do. So in my belief system, whatever you have, you know, whatever you see about your past, I would say that I wouldn't, you know, put money that that's exactly what happened, but I would say 100% that is what happened for you. That is the information that you have to do this work, and that you have everything you need. So I would say absolutely move forward as if it's true, knowing that it's an as if, but still that that's what you've got, and that is valuable. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add that one of the things that, again, going back to Runic John, that we used to do in our journeying, when we visited the other worlds, we would journey into the past as well. So we would think of a situation that even if it was one that we didn't know about, because it could be the far distant past, that something from the ancestors that we really didn't know where the trauma came from, but you go into the past. So we journey to the other world in the past and visit that with the norns, and almost like watching a film, watching a movie, relive that, get as much of that story as you can in that altered state of consciousness, and work to heal it. Because the thing is, our orlog does stretch. It stretches from the past, the present, and the future. And it was one way, when I know very little about my family, so there are stories I don't know. So I was journeying to try and find out those stories and figure out, you know, the issues that were in the present from the past. And that can be, for those who journey, that can be quite a useful thing to do. listen to a drum, get someone to drum for you, go to go in your mind, go to a geographical location and see if you can see the story. I don't know if you want to say anything, see, but no.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. So I do a lot of journeying myself, and I do a lot of practicing. I actually spin wool and sing regularly. So that's as much as possible my daily practice. I have to admit, I don't make it every day. I wish I did. I aim to, but I absolutely spin and sing with the intention of bringing beauty and grace into the world. And in doing that, I often get lots of information about all sorts of things. And I'm not specifically asking for any type of information. What I'm doing is asking that I be healing and grace in the world, that I be a voice of compassion and care. And I get information that way. And I believe it and move forward on it. Yeah. Okay, so if you've got your idea of what you think are the facts of the situation versus your interpretation, I'm wondering if you can look at the ways that you interpret it, and if there's a way to interpret it a little differently, so that if there's a sense of it being a theft, is there a way that it might be a care? Is there a way that it might be something that is brought forward for you rather than something that is taken from you, if that makes sense? And so the point there is to sort of reconcretize your own past or log. So in the Voluspa, she is picking very distinct moments to remember so that she can write the story she wishes in the future, right?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I actually haven't gone back. I have never considered trying to go back and like heal past generations before. But I'm very close with my mother, who's not physically here alive right now. My brother as well. And I do incorporate them a lot when I'm meditating or if I'm doing ritual or bloat. But I think that you're saying that certainly my grandparents on both sides had some traumas. You're saying that if I go back that far and try to help heal them, that is going to heal or help my present, and it's going to help my future descendants. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
And I'm also thinking, like, when we talk about ancestor veneration, this had never occurred to me before, but that really is, if I'm making that offering, if I'm trying to help heal them, that really is ancestor veneration. That's me actually really giving them something, not just putting out a bowl of food offering or something. This is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, it's funny. I'm so glad you said that because I didn't know this. You just showed me something about myself I totally didn't know. Many, many, many years ago, like decades ago, I did some spiritual work on myself where I was then faced with, okay, these are points in my life that I have to heal. And I went to myself as an infant, like showed up, I did a journey to the room in which I was an infant because I wanted to heal that moment. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. I was so scared. And I was like, I can't heal this moment. I just can't. Like, this is overwhelming and tragic and terrifying. I can't do it. But what I ended up doing was going back 3 generations on my father's side and 2 on my mother's side and healing ancestors so that they could grow up to be healthy people, so that their kids could grow up to be healthy people. And until I had healthy versions of my mother and father, and I could show up in that room and everything was okay. But it totally changed my life, absolutely changed my life, because I now had in my mind a healthy version of my mother and father. I didn't have a mother and father until that moment. Like, I did all that work and then suddenly that's who they would have been. That's who they wish to be. That's who they are at their core, that they can't get past the pain to express it, but that is the beauty in them. And I could totally see it, and absolutely changed what I thought of my family and myself.
And it can be so powerful. It's not just a case of, I've done work where you go back and you ask, you forgive your mother or you forgive your father. It's not a case of forgiving. It's a case of actually going into the distant past and creating new versions of them. You're changing your past, and you can do, and the norms do help with that. You're changing your past to change your present, and it's just amazing when you actually start doing it, but it can take a long time.
Absolutely. And I really did do my dissertation on this. And it really did. You can point it out throughout, particularly the Voluspa. I use the Voluspa. You can particularly point out exactly what she's doing to rewrite the past in order to rewrite the present.
We're going to have to wind up in a little bit now, but there was a question from, I think it was Marissa asked the question to you, do you actually literally work with the Norns in journeying? Well, I know I do, but I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones I call in all the time.
They're always there. They're always there when you go to the foot of the tree. They're always there waiting. So you literally work with them. And it's just one other thing. It was interesting. I think Tanya might have joined us just recently. Tanya is very keen on the reading of the Voluspa as a sacred text. And I know you're talking about, and I don't know how many people here have actually read it or just read it as part of reading the whole of, reading the edit and things. But it's quite interesting when Tanya's read parts of the Voluspa out in Icelandic as well as in English, that it is very powerful as a piece of galdr within itself, isn't it? The actual reading of it and the reading of the Voluspa out loud really does bring that magical power like galdr from it. So it might be something that people would want to try to get some good translations of the Voluspa and just get a translation and read it out loud on just sections and see how that affects you as well.
I so want to hear it in Icelandic now.
Yeah, Tanya's read a few. We've got a few recordings somewhere in our files, but I know she started doing it. But it's the sounds of it. Again, it's back to sounds and acoustics. And of course, in Icelandic, I think it sounds more powerful than in English. But that's because it's such an acoustic language, Icelandic. The way things are pronounced and the lilt of it. So yes, so that might be something that people would want to do themselves in rewriting your own myths or your own stories. Reread the Voluspa and the words of the Norns in the Voluspa. Sorry, see, I was just came to my mind.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's beautiful. So yes, it's because it's about time to end. I would suggest doing that rewriting of what your story is and how can that be reinterpreted so that you can fully empower yourself for this moment to move forward. And sorry, I see that I cut you off. I apologize.
Who did you think you cut off? Me?
Yeah.
Oh, Hi, just really quick, you mentioned your dissertation. Was that what you were referring to when you were talking about Udra and the long paper you had access to? Is that what you were referring to in the presentation?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
And
So in the dissertation, I followed several of them. I ended up writing mostly on the Voluspa. I followed gender and the way that it's written through time over the different stories and the repercussions in the communities from those reinterpretations, essentially.
my follow-up question is, do we have access to this? Is there any way that we can read?
No, but I could probably get it to you. No, I've been trying to write it up separately, so it's not available actually, but yeah. But if you give me your email stuff. Oh,
Yes. I would love to. Thank you.
I'm sure there are quite a few who would, who'd like to, but they can contact you, can't they? See, you can be
You can.
contactable through.
Yeah, you can contact me. And I have to admit that one of the reasons that I didn't leave it accessible at this point is because I did so much more research than I ended up in the dissertation. It was one of those, okay, we got to finish now. Wah! And so it's so little that I feel like it's not a good argument when I know that I did all this other research that didn't actually get into the written piece. So I just need to rewrite the whole thing.
You started continuing. It's been going on for years now, hasn't it? So either people can contact C through a website, or if anybody wants to, just give me the email, send me your emails, and I'll send them all across to her for the dissertation. But we're going to have to wrap up now, I'm afraid, because we need to move on. But thank you so much, C. It's just been fantastic as ever. Then we've got some excellent talks we've had today. I'm not going to be hosting for the rest of the day. We've got Rich coming up at what time's Rich on? He's at 4. He's at 4 ET, so 5, 6, 7, 9 o'clock our time. So he's on at 9 p.m. UK and Ireland time, which is in an hour from now. So what we'll do is I'll hand, I think it's Pauline, is it, who's Olivia, who's hosting the last session?